This is Brenna Quigley, your personal geologist and terroir guide. Join me on a road trip through the geologic history of your favorite wine regions around the world. This is Roadside Terroir. Season 2 Burgundy's Côte d'Or is made possible by our Season 2 partners, Becky Wasserman and Company, Lavollée, and Acker Wines. While creating this episode, I found myself absolutely salivating for white Burgundy, and we could barely keep it in the house. So it's with impeccable timing we feature one of our premier partners, Acker Wines. Established in 1820, Acker is the oldest wine shop in America and has a passion for wine and people who love wine. Acker has carried and offered more of the world's fine Burgundy than virtually anyone. They've been an avid supporter of this season of Roadside Terroir since day one, and together, we're committed to bringing the great wines of Burgundy and beyond directly to you. As the largest fine and rare wine auction house in the world, Acker makes it easy to find the elusive producers we feature, even in rare back vintages you could never find in a store. To celebrate our listeners, Acker is offering a discount code for your first purchase. Just use the code ROADSIDE to get 15% off orders of $350 or more. You can learn more at their website, ackerwines.com. We're determined to keep this content free and accessible for everyone. If you'd like to support our show, please consider becoming an insider. Insiders have access to lots of cool stuff, including extra photos, travel guides, and extended interviews with our guests. To learn more, visit our website, roadsideterroir.com. Please don't drink and drive, and remember to keep your eyes on the road. This episode contains explicit language. Our day started early this morning. We left Beaune just as the sun began to rise over the plain to the east, its rays wrestling through a thick wall of autumn fog. We drove along the D974 past Pommard and Volnay before turning off and climbing up through the vines of Meursault to a hidden gem of the Côte de Beaune, the small hamlet of Blagny.
Yeah, you see, this is Blagny. So the little road is splitting Meursault-Perrières and Genèvrières. You have the Domaine here, and Blagny starting right there on the edge of the tree.
I'm here with Benjamin Leroux, Blagny's most fervent spokesperson, as we prepare to embark on a detailed study of the terroirs of Blagny. We've hired an excavator to dig into the soils and reveal the bedrock below. Benjamin was named the technical director at Comte d'Armand in 1999 when he was only 24 years old. He remained there for 15 vintages before setting off to focus on his own micro-negociant label. Today, Ben has dropped the micro prefix and also farms about 8 hectares of organic and biodynamic Domaine vineyards, including a suite of classic Meursault Premier crus and a precious 0.16 hectare of Chassagne-Montrachet. His true love, however, is Blagny.
The hamlet of Blagny is there. After the hamlet, all the vineyards can be called Puligny-Montrachet, and before on that side, Meursault. Split between the two. And then after the Puligny side, it's Saint Aubin.
The first time Ben showed me these vineyards, I could instantly sense the quiet yet profound intensity and how clearly he resonated with the space.
I love Blagny because, just look around you. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And when you taste the wine, you say, whoa, there's something. And I think it's now need to be, recognized as a single terroir, as an appellation by itself.
As much as this place so clearly speaks with its own voice, if it weren't for Ben, I wouldn't even know its name. Blagny is not famous.
Technically, Blagny is not an appellation. It belongs to Puligny and Meursault. Mm-hmm. But it's like the growers of Meursault runs this part, and the growers of Puligny runs the other part.
Blagny sits one level higher than most of the main slope of the Côte d'Or, hidden behind a forested break in the slope called the Domaine, or Donkey's Back, which is actually an outcrop of hard, unplantable limestone. Blagny lies above and beyond the Dodon on a small, gentle slope all its own. The Meursault side is concave, cozy, and almost private, whereas the Puligny side is a bit higher, more convex and prominent, overlooking the Côte below.
Yeah, it's complicated because it's only 3 generations ago that in Blagny they fight to have the possibility of being called Meursault or Puligny, because at the time it was making sense economically. Today we're seeing things differently. So fair enough, it's part of history.
Blagny is not only split between 2 villages, but also between 2 grapes. Most is planted to chardonnay, but a modest 5 hectares is also planted to pinot noir. Particularly notable in the premier cru La Pisse sous le bois.
There are rules, so the reds can only be called Blagny.
Okay.
Again, at the time, Meursault was wanting to stay white, and Volnay was wanting to stay red. Today, you think it's crazy, but at the time, the communication was not like it is now.
If you're confused, you're not alone.
Alors, if it's red, there's no confusion. It could be only Blagny. It takes the name of the lieu-dit. So, like here, we're making Blagny premier cru La Pièce sous le bois. And from the same vineyards, either you call it Meursault premier cru La Pièce sous le bois, and you don't do any reference to Blagny, or you call it Meursault Blagny premier cru, and you don't do any reference of the lieu-dit.
Really?
Yeah, don't ask me why. It's the rule. And but today many estates are using both. We sneak a bit out of the rule at the same time, So since 2 years now, we put it on the label. It's Meursault Blagny premier cru La Pièce sous le bois. Instead of changing the law, we do it. And to be fair, the wines doesn't taste the same as most of the other premier cru there. So it's a different terroir, different taste. To me, in the cellar, because it probably hasn't got the largeness, the length of the others, but it's got other things that the others hasn't got. Such as the minerality, the saltiness, the zest you could get because it's higher. I mean, you see even on the autumn sun, we still have a part in the morning which is on the shade, but it will benefit from the sunset. Cooler place, but warmer sun. Blagny used to be probably 50% red, 50% white. Through time, pull out the Pinot to replace by Chardonnay. So that's fairly easy. You can produce more with Chardonnay and sell them as Meursault premier cru, and it just make the accounting much better. But how we're thinking is a bit different. Is we want to plant Pinot where you have the right geology, and we want to plant Chardonnay where you have the right geology.
Before we start to dig, Ben walks us through his parcels and describes his experiences with this vineyard and the impressions he gets from the wines. This is the information we'll use to direct our exploration beneath the surface.
So we can see some of the bedrock is not far, yeah? Voilà. That's the first row here.
Okay. We begin at the far northeast corner of the vineyard La Pisse sous le bois, right next to the Dodon.
So we will walk and you'll see to the line. At the bottom is Pinot. We have only one block which is Chardonnay on the bottom. Now we're in the middle. We're in the middle of the first block of Pinot. And from here, the vines are more vigorous from where we were. So when we're starting to go on the slope. So here, we have to restrain the vine a little bit.
Yeah, they're taller.
We have more soil. It's richer. I've got no idea.
We continue up to the top of the slope. The gradient gets steeper, and the soils become gravelly and dramatically whiter in color.
And for me, my feeling, and when I'm tasting the fruit, it's where, I can see some Chardonnay planted here, and not especially Pinot.
It starts to get harsher.
I don't see it physically. I see it, on the fruit and on the thickness of the skin, on the tips.
Yeah. And so then, beyond just the soil is getting whiter, it's like a little whiter, white, like chippy, like very calcareous, kind of soft.
Voilà. We call it lave calcaire.
Okay,
so it's where here it's like working in butter. Super easy. Here's the winemaking side. When you have Pinot on Chardonnay soil, the tannins are just pretty strict. It's not a question of extraction. It's a question they're very tight, severe, and very angular. And that's how I define the terroir with the wines we're making. Chardonnay is going well everywhere.
Yeah.
The difference with Chardonnay when you are like on the Pinot soil, it's usually a bit rounder, a bit more exotic. So to me less interesting, but it's making good wine. So then you need to do some analogy which is not interesting, because either we talk of terroir or either we talk about analogy, and you do the same recipe every year, and it will work, but to me the wines are pretty boring and not interesting.
So if Chardonnay can grow everywhere, what is it that makes the difference between good and life-changing? Chardonnay is kind of a sneaky grape. On one hand, it's an excellent translator of terroir, producing exceptional wines from drastically diverse geologies. And yet, at the same time, the grape is easily manipulated, a vehicle for winemaking and technique. So, which is it? When you think about it, isn't it hard to believe that the same grape responsible for the thick, buttery, big box Chardonnay in the grocery store is the same as in the liquid gold of Montrachet, or the electrified laser beams of Saint Aubin? Is it even possible that these differences really come from the earth? From our perch in Blagny, we find ourselves at the intersection of some of the most important Chardonnay growing areas in the world. Today, we'll explore Meursault, Puligny-Montrachet, Chassagne-Montrachet, and Saint Aubin to see if we can discover what sets apart the great terroirs of white Burgundy. So, grab a glass and settle in for the ride.
Where do we start?
Tesson to catch the fog in the Domaine.
Okay.
We set out on our exploration of the vineyards of Meursault in the hands of Anne Morey of Domaine Pierre Morey. Anne is the daughter of Pierre, who is quietly one of the most important names in white Burgundy. From 1988 to 2008, Pierre Morey was the regisseur, or cellar master, of the Puligny superstar Domaine Le Fleuve. We've just arrived in the village Le Tesson. At nearly 300 meters elevation, we feel as though we're at the very top of the slope, looking down over the village of Meursault.
Yeah, the most beautiful view of Meursault here, and a special magic place also. We feel the soil, and there is something. I don't know what exactly, but...
Meursault is the largest village in the Côte d'Aubin, and according to Jasper Morris, has a wine-growing history that dates back to Roman times. There are no Grand Crus in Meursault, and the 134 hectares of Premier Cru span a large and sometimes confusing lineup of wines. There's the complicated red and white situation in Blagny, and a similar debacle bordering Volnay in the north, including the famed Santeno Premier Cru. For these reasons, you might expect Meursault to be another one of those underappreciated villages of the Côte d'Or, but instead it's truly beloved by wine lovers around the world. We're joined once again by our guide, Paul Wasserman.
So it's a vast village, and the most noticeable thing about it is when you look at the hill, rather than the vineyard stopping at the top of what you see, there's a whole other terrace on top of it, which includes Blagny on the south side, and then all the vineyards that are neighboring Aussay on the north side. So you've got this extra kind of like étage, floor, which produces some really phenomenal wines. As soon as the slope starts turning a little more north, there are these vineyards that are in the continuation of the Premier Crus, because I guess that made a big difference to ripeness back in the day. But they're absolutely phenomenal. I mean, Tesson, Luchet, Méchavaux, a little more towards the center of that slope, Narvaux, on top of that terrace up near Aussay, Vireuil, Rougeot, Chevalier on the back on the slope. It's just full of insane lieux-dits, which combined with a fair amount of talent, makes Meursault extremely exciting.
I think part of the reason Meursault is so well loved is that it contains so many excellent examples of the power of terroir, of places with personalities that shine through various artistic interpretations. Basically, everything we're looking for in Burgundy. A quick aside, the term lieu-dit literally translates to named place, and though its usage can be a little bit tricky, it's generally used to describe a specific historical name for a vineyard or parcel, particularly for special village-level vineyards with their own historic names.
There is really a stop in the slope, and we are in the middle of it. First floor, I would say, here, and then just after les Tessons, new quarries, carrières, c'est ça? And then again the slope. And it's why it was, for example...
Tesson sits amongst these impressive village vineyards on the northern edge of the village, which, as Paul and Anne described, sit up on the second floor of Meursault. Françoise Vannier refers to this break in the slope as a step stair, created by a layer of hard, compact limestone in the middle of the slope, with softer, more easily eroded layers of marls above and below it. This part of the slope is unplanted and is littered with evidence of former quarries. The village of Meursault is rather unique in that it decided not to cultivate these former quarries. For the most part. And the vineyards surrounding this break in the slope are extremely rocky. As human beings worked the soils throughout the years and pulled out the large stones, they piled them up to make walls and little stone houses around and within their parcels. The little stone houses, or cabots, in La Tesson are by far the nicest anywhere in the Côte d'Or.
A small village, you know, the castle, the chapel, small houses. For a long time, this small area from Les Tessons was not planted. It was like small garden, see? I think it was dedicated to spend some good time on Sundays, because it's very special, small houses, not like other cabots in other places.
That's rouleaux, huh?
Rouleau, yeah. Rouleau, Michel Bouzereau, ours.
Of course, rouleau's the fanciest.
Of course.
Of course.
And of course, he has the castle, he's the master. And of course, I have the chapel.
Yes, of course you do.
The Morey family has a deep history in Burgundy, which is closely tied to their devout Catholic faith.
Morey family arrived in Meursault in 1793, just after French Revolution, with a wine grower, Morey, from Chassagne. It was a terrible time in France, and masses were forbidden. And Monsieur Morey used to hide a priest, and he escortait.
He accompanied?
Yeah, the priest in Meursault with his son to celebrate masses in a cellar, very protected place. And the son was probably not very concerned about prayer, or I don't know, but the welcoming family in Meursault, whose name was Milot, were wine grower also, of course, with no son, and at this time it was a problem. Only 3 girls, and the son Morey married one of them. So he established in Meursault, and they have 13 children, I think, 11 alive, and I'm one of the great children now. Yeah.
We walk through the Tesson, admiring the view in front of us and the pile of rocks beneath our feet.
And when there is no sun, we feel how it's a cold terroir. Protected but cold. And there are not really nose on these stones, but when you smell the wine, you really feel something cold but nice.
All of the old books about Burgundy describe Meursault as rich and round, with classic tasting notes of butter and hazelnuts. But today, the popular expression seems to have become quite the opposite.
For a long time, when I started to work, I used to hear something which was very difficult to understand to me, because minerality was reserved for Puligny, and roundness and buttery wine and creamy and perhaps fat wine were for Meursault. And I used to work in Les Tessons, Forges, Perrières, And buttery and creamy wine was not really my everyday. So I didn't understand. And finally, I think after a few months and years, okay, Meursault is really a big area and you can find both. Some mineral places, for example, Les Tessons, and some more creamy and open wine. But we don't really work on these places. Okay. And perhaps it's not hasard.
It's not by chance.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. It's not by chance. Mm-hmm.
The Moreys have been making cut, mineral Meursault since before it was cool, but not because of a stylistic preference, but a reflection of their actual vineyard holdings.
We usually hear that wines are like people, and we really prefer, my father already and the rest of the family are really more comfortable with minerality than choy, generous wine. Perhaps because we are not really generous people, but I don't know.
Mine is very mineral.
Yeah, I'm really comfortable with my foot in the roots and in the soil. It's why I'm happy to work with biodynamic. It helps me to be a little more in the sky also, but I have still something to work there.
From Le Tesson, we get back in the car, and almost as if it were a dare, Anne proceeds to up the ante on rocky terroirs. Our next stop is Chaume de Narvaux, just above the unplanted section above the Premier Cru Genévrier.
Here we can come with people saying, you know, vines can grow everywhere, anything else can grow. When people see that, they say, wow, only stones. Meursault, there was, I think, 8 or 9 quarries, and the 2 or 3 last closed at the beginning of 80s, and it's just in this line. It's why it's not planted here, for example. It's too much stone.
Most of these quarries were built into the Chassagne limestone, which will be the most important rock type for our discussion of white Burgundy today. The Chassagne limestone is a thick succession of slightly different layers of hard limestone, all stratigraphically linked together. Often over 45 meters thick, the Chassagne limestone underlies many of the Premier Crus in Meursault, and is also responsible for the entire unplanted mid-slope ridge, or step stair, that breaks up the slope. Much of the Chassagne limestone is made up of white oolite. The base is often dolomitized and was exploited for its magnesium, as we discussed in Pommard in episode 3. And there's also a section of hard, fine-grained limestone that was used for building materials. The Chassagne limestone is named after a huge quarry at the very top of the slope in the village of Chassagne-Montrachet.
And my father was afraid it was really too high for vines here. It was at the beginning of 2000 years. And I said, you know, some people start to talk about global warming. It should be interesting. And when we work on the soil a little, not too much, but a little, to prepare before plantation, we found some roots. So probably it was very, very old roots before phylloxera. But it was really interesting. And my father were all very surprised.
Next, we head through the Dodon and wrap back around into the lower section of the slope into the grandest of the Premier Crus, Meursault-Perrier.
So here is our plot of Perrier, which is a special, really special one. It's not the image of Perrier you can have everywhere else. If you have courage enough, we could go through the new wall because we see one part of the rock. And just here, this plot was probably not planted for a long time because one of the quarries is just here. It was the basket for stones they were not interested in.
Perrier is actually derived from the Latin word petraria, which means stone, and was also used between the 11th and 14th centuries to designate a quarry. So, throughout the Côte d'Or, anywhere you have a vineyard named Perrier, you know it was planted on the site of an ancient quarry. I think this is the true, white oolite. If you look closely, there's
the little
popcorny.
little ooids. They're like
Little what?
Ouids. L'olite blanche.
Ah oui, d'accord.
This white oolite is our first official glance of the Chassagne limestone. If you look very closely, you'll notice that it looks sort of like popcorn, or a little cluster of tiny white fish eggs. This rock formed on the Jurassic seafloor 165 million years ago, but these ooids aren't actually fossils. They're more like tiny limestone snowballs, each formed from a single grain of sand, rolling around in the gentle tides of a warm, protected ancient lagoon. When we get back into the car and head back northwards toward the village of Meursault, Anne and Paul continue to point out the vineyards.
So here is Terroir on the left, Meursault Charme on the right, and Genot-Boulanger in front of us.
Followed by Purcell, Boucher, and the Goutte d'Or. Many of these vineyards are split into two parts, an upper part, usually rockier and leaner, and a lower part, usually a bit richer. Unfortunately, the French terms for above and below are ridiculously similar.
Can just once and for all, can you please explain the dessous and the dessous?
Okay. You mean how you say it? How you pronounce it?
How you say it, what it means, how it's spelled differently, how this is still happening.
Okay, so dessus means on top of, and it's spelled with a double S-U-S. And dessous means bottom, and it's spelled with a double S-O-U-S. So to make an U in French, you have to close your mouth. You have to like pucker your lips. U, like that. And to make a OO sound, you have to open your mouth. OO. Dessus, closed mouth. Dessous, open mouth.
Which is which?
Dessus, the closed, the more trebly sound one, is the top. Dessous, the wider, bassier one, is the bottom.
All right.
I'm not sure I helped you. Ooh. Just think of the bottom as being bassy.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so do you want to try?
So it's kind of like dessous
Good.
and dessous.
Good.
Dessous, dessous.
Good.
That, you heard that?
I do hear it.
Even without having a Grand Cru, Meursault has held its own next to its famous neighbors for decades, if not longer, and is widely regarded as having the greatest examples of village wines in the entire Côte d'Or. Here's Jasper Morris, author of Inside Burgundy.
Meursault is the one for village wines. Puligny is a big step up in the Premier Crus. But Meursault, unquestionably, and there's lots of it, and there's lots of good growers. And of course, it is a village which has had more of a tradition of single vineyard village wines than Puligny. It was pretty rare in the past. It's changing a bit, but it's still more typically a blend. Yeah.
Do you have a good sense of why that is?
Because Meursault has been a village with many more small producers, because the Négociants were much more interested in villages which had Montrachet in the name. I mean, there are still, I can nearly get to 20 producers in Puligny. I can count 50 or 60 exciting producers in Meursault, and there are double that number who exist, but I don't know them all either. They may be less.
Historically, this has included producers like Pierre Morey, Domaine de Comte Lafon, Cocheterie, Arnaud Hont, Jean-Philippe Fichet, Henri Germain, Antoine Jobard, and more recently, exciting producers such as Bernard Bonin, Benjamin Leroux, Pierre-Henri Rougeau, Genot-Boulanger, and François Mikulski, amongst many, many others.
And even when I started back in the 80s, domains like Michelot had a whole range of different lieux-dits. But now more and more people are having a whole big range of different lieux-dits in Meursault.
Yeah, I mean, and some of them are just as famous now, you know, like Tesson.
Tesson, Narvaux,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Luchet, thanks to Jean-Marc's Instagram handle.
Yeah. Well, indeed, and the play he wrote of that name.
Really?
Yeah. It gets acted every so often. They change the vintage. It's a two-man play based around Luchet.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Of course, we would be remiss to discuss the village of Meursault without mentioning its resident celebrity, Jean-Marc Rouleau. The wines of Domaine Rouleau were already widely respected before Jean-Marc took the reins, but it was only after he returned to the Domaine in 1989 that the wines achieved the worldwide superstardom that they have today. Jean-Marc ushered in an era of fresher, leaner styles of Chardonnay. Before he returned to the Domaine, Jean-Marc was pursuing a career in acting, which he remains dedicated to today. The geology of Meursault is fascinating, and I could spend weeks just exploring the geologic details of each individual lieu dit. But, in a place where the distinct personalities of the vineyards are so clearly articulated, it seems more powerful to do this geologic exploration with the wines themselves. And there's perhaps no better guide to the wines of Meursault than one of the true masters, Dominique Lafon of Domaine de Comte Lafon. Here is Daniel Jonas on his dear friend Dominique.
Well, I think Dominique Lafon is one of the most important producers of white Burgundy, one of the most important producers of Burgundy, period, and personalities in Burgundy. And not only because of the quality of the wines, but because of the history of the estate, the importance of the history of the estate, the importance of the holdings that they have, the continuity from great-grandfather to father to son, and now to daughter and nephew. So you have this line of consistency through the ages of great quality. His very curious mind and always able to question what he's doing. Able to question, able to make tweaks to make it better.
As soon as we arrive, Dominique rushes around from barrel to barrel like a kid in a candy store, pouring the next taste almost as quickly as we can taste the first.
Okay, you can empty it in my glass, and when you're finished, don't drink it up. We still have a lot of wines to taste.
A true savant, Dominique wants to taste and discuss everything. There couldn't be anything more refreshing than watching a master of their craft delighted by the nuances of each detail.
I think that he's one of the more thoughtful winemakers. When you talk to him, you're going to get a lengthy explanation of why. And he's going to be extremely generous in sharing examples of wines. It's a tasting that you do at Lafon that you almost go into with a slight bit of dread. And I say that in the nicest way, because you know you're going to be there for a very long time. You're going to be late for your next appointment.
Dominique's first job wasn't actually at the family domaine, but for Becky Wasserman. And to this day, he credits this formative time in his life and tasting career to his work with Becky.
To me, a great wine is a wine which, I'm searching my words in English. I like intensity with lightness, which is a kind of a bizarre combination, hard to deal with. But I think the best wines, they are not, lightness could be a defect, but if you add intensity to it, then it's a quality. And to me, the best wines get that combination of both things.
We begin the tasting of Meursault Premier Crus with Boucher.
Okay, the cru. So the first one we'll taste is Boucher, because to me it's the most elegant. To me there are wines which are in the soil and wines which are in the air. This is in the air, there's no soil. Lovely wine. Charming lightness, elegance, and kind of easy to drink and not too powerful. Early ripening, very early ripening. But also, I think on a light soil like this, you cannot ask the vine to build like 13.5% alcohol. They go overripe. Good dough? So to me, when you move Boucher and Good dough, it's like almost the most opposite wines you can find. Then my piece of Good dough is next to François Vannier, who you may have heard of, and Arnaud.
Okay, cool.
This place you can pick later. It retains energy and freshness longer.
Yeah, that has a lot of energy.
Yeah, it's so different. You don't feel almost don't feel you're in the same village. If you walk from the top of Good dough to the Boucher, it might take you 5 minutes. The Purcell, which is on the northern part of Meursault with clay. I find in the Purcell that intensity and kind of energy you have in the Good dough, but it's like if the subsoil was taking you toward the Genevière. But to me, the attack is like, when you start, it's like the good door, and the finish is so elegant and so high tones. So it reminds me like a little bit of what you get in Genevière. Almost 1 hectare, fair amount of very old vines, almost 3/4 is 70 years old. Last to be picked of the Premier Cru, like late ripening place. The late ripening. You know, we're in Meursault, it's not, we don't pick in October.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like a trick. Like even on the nose, it feels really intense, and you're almost kind of like bracing for it, and then it's very, very soft and pretty. Genevière.
You know, I think it's easier to drink a bottle of Genevière than a bottle of Perrier, because to me, Perrier can be impressive. Well, Genevière has that smoothness and like elegance and like gentleness to it, which I really appreciate, because in the end, you know, it's all about drinking, and it's very comfortable drinking Genevière. And you know, you get floral characters to it. You get that thing, some kind of high tones, flavors, and almost spicy characters to it. And it's not only round and seductive. You get that tension, or whatever you call it, minerality, salinity in the finish.
Yeah, but like the front of Genevière compared to Purcell is like wildly different.
Oh yeah. Because
like
this you get a lot of lightness and caress and elegance in the Genevière when you get more power in the Purcell. And the length is amazing. But it's a lovely vineyard we have. It's a more, you know, those places, they're more tricky to make. Because those light soil, they go from unripe to ripe in a minute. If they turn slightly to ripe, you lose everything. When you have more soil, if you're slightly too ripe, it still behaves well. So it's as a winemaker, it's very interesting to make, but it needs a lot of care and a lot of attention. You know, heavy soil, rich soil that brings richer wine, you know, your mistakes doesn't show as much.
Right.
So, okay, Meursault Charme. That's easier to make Meursault Charme than Genevière. More soil. It can stand a good ripeness. It's a more fleshy wine. It's always amazing balance in the Charme we produce. You know, in terms, if you look at ripeness and acidity together, it's like you can be quite ripe, quite high alcohol, and still retain an amazing acidity. It's more intense. But I like the power of the aftertaste.
And finally, Perrier.
That was also first to be picked with the same day as the Boucher. It's quite whitish soil in Perrier, marl. And harder to plow than Genevière. Because, you know, like the white marl, it's like, how do you say, pottery? So the timing to work those soils is kind of tricky. Very floral to me. Kind of almost exotic on the nose. But then the mouth is just like, pushes so much energy. Huh? It's less weight than Charme. It's more intensity. To me, it's a nice combination of what we had in the Charme and what we had in the Genevière. But it's got it has the quality of both wines. It's power and elegance and tension, and you get like everything piled up in a wine. To me, very important to know what makes that place special. What is the character of the place? Because it's combined with a lot of other components, which is the exposure, the altitude, the wind or no wind, the protection, and the heat, or the, you know, we're trying to find explanation for why does it taste like this, and I think we have to be careful and quite humble about that. it's part of the education we all get when we live here. Something you carry from father to son. There's all that which adds layers to what you see in a wine, which makes it so interesting. Like I'm with two young guys now, well, my daughter and my nephew, and I'm driving the vineyard. Oh, this belongs to this guy. This is, and this was planted like this, and this, because I have all this information. Because after 35 years, of course, you've seen how it was, and it's kind of complex, but it's because it's very human also.
Yeah.
I think
Exactly.
And I think to put the human on top of all that is kind of interesting.
Towards the end of the tasting, I asked Dominique to tell me about his role in bringing Burgundian winemaking into the modern age. But he insists that story has already been told, and that today he's much more interested in exploring the innovations of the new generation, such as his daughter Leia and nephew Pierre, and expresses his excitement in what they'll accomplish. As we drive out of the village of Meursault, we notice something peculiar. Even though we're at the very base of the main slope, the village itself is on its own little hill. A mound of limestone right where you would expect the deep alluvial sediments of the Bresse Graben to begin. Françoise believes that this limestone is most likely, yes, you guessed it, the Chassagne limestone, and explains that its presence here is likely due to a major tectonic fault that downdropped a large block of limestone off of the slope and into the valley. As we drive across the invisible boundary between Meursault and Puligny-Montrachet, it becomes clear that Meursault is higher in elevation than Puligny, which sits even further out into the alluvial plain. This has pretty incredible implications. First of all, it means there's a distinct geologic difference between the villages of Meursault and Puligny, which is clearly reflected in the wines. While Meursault's village wines are among some of the most interesting in the Côte d'Or, the village wines of Puligny-Montrachet can be among some of the least interesting. The deep, potentially waterlogged alluvial sediments out in the plain are rich in heavy clay and can produce wines that feel similar to the textural description of their soils. But this geologic difference also influences human behavior. You see, without this block of solid limestone, the village of Puligny is truly closer to the underground water table, and therefore, none of the buildings have underground cellars, meaning their wines must be aged and stored above ground. Historically, long aging in a cold cellar was not stylistically possible in Puligny, and still isn't possible today without controlling the temperature in warmer months. Above the village, the slope gradient gradually increases, forming one of the most classic, concave Burgundian slope profiles in the Côte d'Or, with a clear delineation between the Premier and Grand Crus on the gentle mid-slope and the village wines on the flatter, lower slope.
And we will turn left on top, direction to Puligny.
To help us explore the terroirs of Puligny and Chassagne, we're joined by Guillaume Lavollée of Domaine Genot-Boulanger.
So here, this is the Meursault Charme Premier Cru, and above the road, this is Meursault Perrier, right here. We are on the border, Meursault on the right, Puligny on the left. This is Meursault Charme, this is Puligny-les-Combettes. So now we are in Puligny. So at the Domaine we have a lot of different terroir appellations. So in practice, we work 40 different plots, which is a lot. So we have different appellations, especially village one, that we blend, especially red. So as a result, we make about 30 different cuvées.
Guillaume and his wife Aude have been at the helm of the Domaine since Aude joined her father, François, in 2008. Though they're based in Meursault, they own and farm an impressive selection of vineyards throughout the Côte d'Or, as well as a few hectares in both the Côte de Nuits and Côte Chalonnaise.
So Genot-Boulanger was the family name of her great-grandparents. They bought several pieces of plots along their history. Starting in Mercurey in 1974, they bought 10 hectares from Château de Centenay, and the year after, they needed to buy something else because they did not have any building for vinification in the first purchase, and they bought the property in Meursault.
called Chateau Masson. That was the beginning of the history. First vintage vinified by the Domaine and bottled 75. So now we are closer to Les Folatières. You can park here, yes.
We arrive in the Puligny-Montrachet Premier Cru Les Folatières on a cold, rainy, and muddy afternoon in November.
So as you can see, the slope is quite flat here. Folatière goes up to the hill there.
Yeah.
So you imagine how different the soil can be here compared to over there. A specific lieu-dit of Folatière called Au Chagneau.
Folatière lies along the upper mid-slope. Just one vineyard separates it from the Grand Crus of Montrachet and Chevalier-Montrachet. Above Folatière is an unplanted section of Chassagne limestone, and above that is the Puligny portion of Blagny. In stark contrast to the bottom of the slope, the soils in the upper parts of Puligny can be as thin as 20 centimeters, or just over half a foot deep.
So here we have quite a lot of clay, as you can see here. And the main difference with Chassagne, as I can see, is the quantity of piece of rocks that we can find mixed with the clay.
There's lots of different rocks.
Lots of
Everything's
different
like a little different. Yeah.
Yep.
And the depth of the soil here?
So probably 40 to 50 centimeters. You know it when you plow and you never touch the mother rock.
Guillaume explains that this vineyard is particularly rocky, and that the soil is loamier than many of his other sites. This increase in rocks and silt means it's particularly well draining, and even on a rainy day like today, our boots are only caked with a modest amount of brown mud. Next, we drive south from Folatière through the cluster of Grand Cru vineyards and into the village of Chassagne-Montrachet. The border between Puligny-Montrachet and Chassagne-Montrachet goes right through the most famous white wine vineyard of all, Le Montrachet, allowing both villages to call it their own. Just past the Grand Crus is a large valley with a major highway, the former RN6, that takes you all the way up into Saint Aubin. On the opposite side of the valley is the incredibly steep slope that marks the main slope of Chassagne, with the Chassagne quarry right at the top.
So we are driving through the Premier Cru of Chassagne-Montrachet. On the right side you have Les Chenevottes. Turn left. On top here it's the beginning of Les Vergers. But in Les Vergers there are several subdivisions. This is the main Verger part. Where we go now, it's a part called Pétingeret. Below Pétingeret we own a second plot. Yeah, turn right. In Les Paquels. All these lieux-dits, they composed the full appellation Verger. Quarry over there. Yeah, and just below the quarry, it's the Clos Saint-Jean.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we own a small piece of plot in Clos Saint-Jean as well. White.
Is Clos Saint-Jean mostly red?
Clos Saint-Jean is mostly red, absolutely, yes. And famous for being red. Probably one of the most beautiful terroirs for red in Chassagne. Keep two wheels on the road.
Oh. Just in case?
Yeah. Okay, great. It's always more secure to have one or two wheels on the road when it's wet. So the idea is to show you this plot, which is a special. We can have a look from the top and then go inside. So this is the Premier Cru Les Vergers here and below. This part is a specific clos inside Les Vergers called Clos Saint-Marc that we don't use on the label because we blend, as I explained in the car, this plot with another plot of Verger situated in Les Paquels below. It's the clos in between this Murger and the wall over there. Yeah, we are three different owners inside this clos. So we are on the top of the appellation Chassagne, and let's go this way. Look at that.
Yeah.
This is,
Oh.
yeah, it's like iron,
Yeah.
and we find a lot here in Chassagne. Les Vergers, everywhere.
Can we go all the way? Is it okay?
Until the end?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, yeah, sure. Sure. You can see here how red
Yeah.
is the soil compared to the top. We planted many cover crops that we just destroyed recently, before the fall.
Wow.
Is it something naturally occurring in the soil? Or do you think it...
I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of them. Yeah. And see the... Oh, this is actually really cool. See this shape?
Yes.
How it's actually called, like the geologic description for it is called botryoidal hematite because it looks like a grape bunch. You can really see it.
Scattered throughout the vineyard are several lumps of dense nodules of pure iron metal. Their bubbly, bulbous texture looks just like a bunch of grapes, so geologists call it botryoidal hematite. These odd-looking globs of iron are often mistaken for meteorites. Instead, they form from iron-rich solutions that circulate through the limestone rocks as they're buried. Along with the deep red color of the soil here, they clearly indicate that these soils contain a lot of iron.
Oh yes.
Too soft.
Maybe on this part you can find piece of rocks.
It's the Chassagne limestone.
Chassagne limestone?
It's appropriate.
Yeah, it's appropriate. And for years we had it in the living room as well.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, at home. This is the part of
Okay.
Chassagne where we have mostly Chardonnay. But we could, if we want to, plant Pinot Noir here. This is one of the appellations that allowed to do it. But the terroir of Clos Saint-Jean over there is more appropriate and famous for Pinot Noir. The type of terroir we find beginning in Clos Saint-Jean, not here, is similar to what we find in Côte de Nuit.
South of the village of Chassagne, a major geologic shift occurs beneath the surface, and with it, Pinot Noir begins to take over the slope once again. Tectonic activity has faulted and rearranged the rocks south of the village of Chassagne, causing a resurgence of the geologically older rock types typically found in the Côte de Nuit.
And the problem with Chassagne-Montrachet is that most of the village vineyards should be planted in red, not white.
In what way do you identify those soils and vineyards?
Only by the result.
Ah,
Yeah. I don't know enough geologically. It's not in the colour of the topsoil, as we were discussing the other night, insofar as that Montrachet is quite red in colour. So I think it's more what's going on underneath. But it does depend on what sort of wine you want to make. Chassagne, I think everybody in the marketplace agrees probably that too much has been switched from red to white.
Jasper, Paul, and many others are madly in love with the red wines of Chassagne, and each have stories of countless blind tastings where someone has been led astray to the Côte de Nuit by a well-placed Chassagne Rouge. Paul describes the wines as rich in iron, feral, and almost bloody. And it's not just Chassagne. The famed white wine villages of the Côte d'Or come to an end here. Further south, both Santenay and Morange are more noted for their red wines than for Chardonnay. Could it possibly be a coincidence that the grape plantings follow this geologic pattern so clearly?
You know what it's like? It's like frosting a cake and like scraping the scraper off.
Absolument.
As we scrape the red clay off of our shoes before getting back into the car, we're impressed by the diversity of vineyards that produce exceptional Chardonnay.
Oh Lord, there's so much more. When you think you have it all up.
It's a great comparison of the...
You know how we call it, why we call it terre amoureuse.
Yeah? There we go.
Terre amoureuse.
Terre amoureuse.
Just won't let you go.
Won't let you go, exactly.
Later, when we return back to Domaine Genot-Boulanger, we taste a vertical of the wines from these vineyards spanning several different vintages. Guillaume describes and demonstrates how the terroirs evolve through time, each one remaining distinct from the others, but developing along its own personal trajectory, adding yet another dimension to the idea of the expression of a place. But for now, we have an appointment with the master of Burgundy and terroirs, our geological guide Françoise Vannier, in the grandest Grand Cru of the Côte de Beaune. Montrachet is one of the few vineyards in the Côte d'Or that was out of reach long before the wines of Burgundy were world famous.
It's been famous forever. It's always been the greatest white wine in Burgundy. And the furthest books I have who actually describe it are from the 18th century, and it's just so obviously great.
The Montrachet vineyards are nestled beneath a small, unplanted convexity on the slope of Chassagne limestone called Montrachet.
Oh, well, let's start with that. Montrachet means basically the bald mountain. Basically, it was so stony that very, very little grew on it.
Above the Montrachet is the village of Saint Aubin. Below it, the vineyard Chevalier-Montrachet, then Montrachet, then Betard-Montrachet, and finally Bienvenue-Betard-Montrachet. According to Jasper Morris, there's evidence of vines planted in Montrachet back to 1252, though it's unclear when the legends of its greatness spread around the world. We know its value was prized by the mid-1800s, with even Thomas Jefferson cited as a fan. Dr. Lavollée himself wrote that the wines should be considered as one of those rare marvels in which only a small number of the chosen are permitted to appreciate the perfection, and that he who is able to purchase some bottles of the best vintages should be satisfied that whatever the price, he will never have paid too much. As of this recording, a bottle of 2010 Le Fleuve Montrachet is listed for sale online for $25,000 a bottle. I can't help but wonder what Dr. Lavollée would think.
So you see how thin the soil, how thin the soil is and how close to the surface the rock is.
Yeah.
Still the Chassagne limestone.
Wow.
Boring Chassagne limestone. And below, there is a Grand Cru. You've got Le Montrachet.
Montrachet, split between Chassagne and Puligny. Just below it, Betard is the same thing. Above the Montrachet is Chevalier-Montrachet. That's all in Puligny.
You had, once upon a time, a long time ago, you've got a fault, a very big, a huge fault between Chassagne limestone to the west and the marl and the ferruginous oolite and the Ladois limestone. And because the marls were easy to erode, the marls disappeared. So you've got Le Montrachet with a little part onto the Chassagne limestone, but most of Le Montrachet is limited by the fault plains there.
How do they taste? Montrachet is the most regal. It combines power, it combines minerality, there's a sense of weight, but it's not like warm weight like Terroir has. It's a big, beautiful, not over-the-top wine. My favorite, and a lot of people's favorite, is often Chevalier-Montrachet. It's above it, the slope gets steeper. I'm sure the soils have nothing to do with one another. There's apparently a fault between the two. And it is racy and cutting and full of energy and also has quite a bit of power.
Françoise and I drive up to the very top of Chevalier-Montrachet, searching for an elusive outcrop of white, fossiliferous marl.
Yes, yes. Voila, it was the right way. And my little tiny car. Okay, that's it. And this is the upper part of Le Montrachet here. And you've got the Pholadomia bellona marl. And if I am not too bad, but I could find Pholadomia, a fossil, but I don't know. I don't know. It's looking like a heart, few centimeters.
Great.
Here, you see the heart?
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's Pholadomia bellona. I introduce you. So this one is a Middle Jurassic marl and not an Upper Jurassic marl.
Okay.
It's not the same as in Volnay.
And we then drive back down the slope to the road with Montrachet on one side and Betard-Montrachet just below it.
Betard, definitely a difference in geology. It's a powerful wine. It's powerful, cuddly. It needs a lot of age to get over its baby fat. Let's just put it that way. It ages effortlessly because of its weight. And old Betards can be just incredible wines.
And the alluviums, the colluvium and alluviums that accumulated are very, very rapidly, very thick. And it's funny also because you've got Grand Cru, and in the mind of most of the people, if you've got Grand Cru, for sure you should have Jurassic substratum, and to my opinion, it's not completely true in Puligny-Montrachet. Yeah.
North of it is Bienvenue. Now, Bienvenue's not very liked because it's kind of skinny and thin, but that's why I love it. I think it's so graceful, so pretty. I don't really care if it fits more with the top of the Premier Crus or not. And then the last one left is Crillot. So Crillot's less than 2 hectares, I believe. It's at the south end of Bâtard, and it's so small, and there are so few examples that everybody kind of poo-poos it. It's powerful. The examples I know are just Lamy and Domaine, and they're so brilliant that I wouldn't say it lacks any stuffing whatsoever. Part of that may be linked to their farming. Those 2 wines are certainly brilliant.
The fault that separates Montrachet from Chevalier above it has dropped down a tiny little sliver of geologically younger rocks, right into the center of the vineyard.
So we can walk quickly to see the fault. The fault plane, if you wish. It's not an obligation. So up, my hammer.
Together, we walk directly up to the fault plane at the top of Le Montrachet.
So this is the soils of the Ladois?
Yes. So once again, a typical white soil for white wines. No, I'm just kidding, but for sure it works properly and perfectly. I agree. It's quite dark.
Yeah.
The soil is dark brown. To my opinion, this is one of the fishes of the ferruginous oolite, this one. It's funny.
Oh wow, it really changes.
Voilà. And I think that it is a fault plane. With a crust of calcite and breccia below.
Oh wow.
Yes, here you can... You see everything has been re-cemented and broken and recrystallized.
And so it's the actual plane of the fault.
Yes, yes.
That's really cool.
Voilà, voilà. And somewhere you've got the road, and somewhere after you find the end of the Ladois limestone and the pinch out of the Pliocene and Quaternary deposits. So here it is. For once, the monks work properly. No, I'm just joking because, as you see, I'm not convinced that the monks did everything.
I love the idea of this phenomenal, spiritual, and indescribably perfect terroir. It's not a result of the perfect singular piece of limestone perfectly situated on the slope, but of a balance of extremes. Montrachet is not the bald mountain above, nor is it the deep alluvial clay below. It's both, and so much more. As James Wilson describes in his book Terroir, it's the royal plasma of a marvelous geologic heritage. Thinking about the wines of Montrachet and the levels of grandeur that surround it really makes you think about what role winemaking has to play in the world of white Burgundy. If vineyards like Montrachet are so exceptional, does it really take a certain skill or style to make Grand Cru?
Yeah, well, actually, there's a little nuance there. You make red wine, but you age white wine because there's no maceration. You press directly.
In the simplest sense, all you really do to make white wine is pick the grapes, press off the juice, and let it ferment. So, hypothetically, any differences in the white wine itself must come from differences in the vineyard. Of course, that isn't entirely true. Though the style of white winemaking might be a little less obvious, maybe a bit more focused on detail and nuance, there are still plenty of stylistic decisions to be made.
The first decision, which very much affects the style, is whether you're picking early. The harvest date is crucial. Everybody presses in whole clusters, nobody destems whites, but before that you can crush or not. And then, I guess it's about sulfur. And that's a big thing right now as well. Even people that use classic amounts of sulfur a little later may today choose to vinify without sulfur whatsoever.
And there's more, too, such as size and toast of the barrels, batonnage, racking, length of aging, etc., that all influence the taste of the wine. As winemaking got more precise and white Burgundy became more coveted, certain styles of white Burgundy, such as heavy oak, reduction, and even minerality, became more and more popular. Suddenly, it began to feel like you weren't tasting terroir very often at all anymore. Just another concoction of oak and sulfur.
I'm a big believer that sulfur creates this impression of minerality. However, it's not just sulfur. Minerality is real. I want more of that true density, not the sulfur kind. I don't care if it comes from Montrachet, but, over-tilled, chemical, oaked, 100 parts per million sulfur or more. Can't drink it anymore.
There was a time when I really wanted to dig into this idea and understand each piece of the puzzle. But the more I looked into it, the more I kept hearing the same thing.
Almost even more than reds, what you do in the vineyards with Chardonnay is really important. Because great farming actually is what makes the finish of white Burgundy. Because it's not tannin. If Chardonnay is going to remain a relevant great wine for Burgundy, it starts in the vineyards, and you see it in the great farmers. These finishes that are lengthening, that are getting salty, that are getting so acidic even in warm vintages, you're going like, no, I know they don't acidify, but it's so surprisingly fresh.
I heard a very similar sentiment from every grower we spoke to, and also during several conversations with the super sommelier turned winemaker, Rajat Par. Sure, there's style in winemaking, but when it comes to white Burgundy, farming just has to come first. And although this is becoming increasingly important with climate change today, this isn't a new idea. It's actually a concept shared by some of the original great names, such as the Moreys and the Lafleves. I asked Anne to tell me the story of how her father and Anne-Claude Lafleve learned about biodynamics. Just to note, the sounds you'll hear in the background are of a horse getting ready to plow the parcel we're standing in.
My father has always been very careful about the vines, and he was really concerned about changes in the vineyard since the 70s, with every year new products to spray on the vines. But he didn't know exactly in which way to go because, at the beginning of 60s, organic methods in vines or in general were usually people who just not wanted to work too much, be cool, everything will go perfectly. So he knew for a long time that there was something which was necessary to change, but didn't know exactly in which way to go. So years ago, probably in Dominique vineyard. And when he started to work at Lafleve, at the end of 80s, he said, okay, it's a really big domain with a lot of beautiful appellation, and I will probably find all the answer I am looking for. And he was very surprised it was the opposite. And the soils were in a terrible stage. And a few years after Anne-Claude arrived, she felt there was something wrong very quickly because she was really a person feeling the things. And she met a lot of people, Claude Bourguignon, François Boucher, who was the first man to really advise us in biodynamic methods.
Though Lafleve was certainly not the first biodynamic producer in the Côte d'Or, they were one of the most important, thanks to Anne-Claude Lafleve, the granddaughter of Joseph Lafleve, who founded the Domaine. Anne-Claude's presence is legendary in Burgundy, as was her conviction and desire to educate others.
And then Anne-Claude arrived, and then they started organic and biodynamic and chemical, and very quickly they stopped completely chemical. But we did exactly the same in our own domain. And he was convinced that it was perhaps not the only way, but a good way. We served each other in that way. That was really nice.
Over time, Anne-Claude became completely committed to the environment and of her role as a steward to these precious pieces of our planet. She even started a school for biodynamics called École du Vin et Terroir in 2008, along with several other important growers in the region, which was attended by many of Burgundy's great winemakers of today. Sadly, she passed away from cancer in 2015 at only 59, but left behind a legacy of thoughtfulness and respect for the land that you can still feel in Burgundy today.
And we use more and more plants sprayed in the vineyard, also not only biodynamic like Steiner did and advised. We work, a lot of with everything can be fine for live. And for example, we plow some vines with horse also, because it's really interesting to work with horse. It's amazing, really. And probably the influence of the animal itself is important.
And so, even though we set out to learn about style in the context of winemaking, we became much more interested in styles of farming. Just above the Montrachet Grand Crus lies a totally different world, the tucked-away, high-elevation village of Saint Aubin. Some of the best vineyards of Saint Aubin begin less than 200 meters away from Chassagne-Montrachet, just over the Mont Rachet itself.
That's a small piece of land, there is no appellation. You can plant, but it's Bourgogne. But the name of the climate is Le Mont Rachet. But in two words, Mont Rachet. It's a little hill with no hair.
Yeah.
We're joined in Saint Aubin by one of the most revolutionary farmers and winemakers in the region, Olivier Lamy of Domaine Hubert Lamy.
So you have Chassagne over there under the quarry.
Yes.
And Blagny directly on the same altitude as we are right now. Saint Aubin is very different because it's like crescent shaped. You have things that look south, almost southwest in some places, immediately to your right, that are very, very steep. And above them, you have a plateau. Then you enter the valley and you make an abrupt 90-degree turn to the left. And then you're staring at a whole hillside of vineyards that are basically a parallel to the Côte. And those are the iconic vineyards of Saint Aubin in the sense that you're full of white marl, you're incredibly steep, you're in the combe, and basically you're producing some of the sharpest, most electric wines of the Côte d'Or. You have a serious amount of talent in Saint Aubin, actually. There's Lamy. Another one of my favorite domains is Jean-Claude Bachelet. You have obviously people like Pierre-Yves Colin-Moret making a fair amount of Saint Aubin. You have natty people too, Dorin, and people like that. So you've got a certain amount of people who right now are making great enough wine that is really dragging the appellation out of obscurity. And nobody does that better than Olivier Lamy. And we owe a great deal of debt to his father, who just passed away, because his father basically built 90% of the domain before Olivier arrived. Then Olivier came along, took it to an entirely different level, and yeah, he's kind of my shining star right now in white winemaking because it's so different and so energetic. A lot of people's too. But basically everything he does emphasizes this verticality, this connection to the soil. They're incredible wines. He's frankly one of the great visionaries for white Burgundy.
I first visited Olivier several years ago and was completely enthralled by his energy, enthusiasm, and profoundly terroir-driven wines. He, however, is still a little bit shocked by how many rocks I collected from his vineyards.
Because you walk, when you go to the neighbors to take some
rocks.
Yes, you take some rocks. You take in your pockets.
I need more. We head first to the southwest-facing vineyards of Mergère de Dentachien at the top of the slope, and Anne Morey just below it.
That hill just has incredible vineyards. Starting just above Chassagne-Montrachet, I could drink either of those two wines for the rest of my life and not need any other white Burgundy. They're incredibly stony wines. You had to drag stones out. That's a place actually where Terroir was a little modified by people to plant vineyards. They are racy like hell. I mean, they are so stony. Meursault is a small wall. That's a Meursault.
Okay.
It's because the rocks that are under here are really jagged, and they're called dents de chien.
Last time when you visit 10 years ago, you take some piece of rock. Here. This one. And the wall break in the middle.
It's not the same as what you find over there with very hard limestone. The limestone that has holes in it.
Les belles pierres avec les trous, les gens les ont pris pour faire des décorations de jardin.
Ils ont, oui.
Donc il n'y en a plus guère, presque plus.
There's almost none of those rocks left because people take them to put in their gardens as decoration. These are not the dents de chien. These are lave.
Dent de chien translates to the teeth of the dog and is named after the sharp, odd-shaped rocks that crop out in the cliff face just below us. Dent de chien is a colloquial term and can actually be several different kinds of vertically fractured, massive, fine-grained limestones that weather into this particular jagged form. In contrast, the weathering pattern of the rocks beneath our feet is more horizontal, more shaly or plate-like, and is called lave.
On Remy?
Yes.
Right over there?
Yes, you can see.
Those soils.
It's the same here. Some vineyard you have a lot of hard limestone with some big wall. Some other vineyard is more like this. Ça dépend. Il y a the two. The bottom is hard limestone. After you have more this in the middle, and more on the top c'est de la roche très dure avec des petites bulles, les vrais comme les dents de chien en fait. Au-dessus des Remy, c'est plus proche, assez proche des dents de chien. Dans les types de sol. Mais avec pas la même altitude, pas la même inclinaison non plus.
Okay, so in the geological cut, normally there's very hard limestone at the bottom, there's this in the middle, and there's the real dent de chien with the holes on the top.
Like this one. Tu vois les cailloux au-dessus là avec les trous?
The one on top of the wall with the holes. That's a dent de chien.
Okay.
Tu veux t'arrêter? Il y en a là, il y en a là. Big one.
That's
We then head over to the east-facing slope of Saint Aubin, almost completely perpendicular to this one.
It's a mix of white marl and éboulis calcaires.
Scree, right? Éboulis calcaires.
Yeah.
J'ai une parcelle là-haut.
That's just so different in color.
Yes, because these people just turn on now there is more humid, there is more brown, but when it will be dry, it will be white.
It'll be
That's a little rounder because of the clay, a little more, fat. And then the top is like super mineral. And let's go drink.
C'est bon? On y va?
Merci, Olivier.
As we drive back to the Domaine, we pause right in front of an old stone house, in front of the vineyard Terroir chez Edouard.
Bonjour. Ça m'étonnerait, j'ai pas envie d'accrocher le mur de... Attends qu'il tombe.
Il est en retraite maintenant, c'est fini.
Passe pour tomber le mur avant que ce soit fini. Bon, ça passe. Merci. Bonne soirée. I like every time this for American people is very old. In 1787, there is these people live was negotiating in Paris.
All right.
That's House Edouard, la maison d'Edouard.
That's Edward's house.
Yeah.
It is.
The vineyard is
Just behind there, yeah.
Derrière chez Edouard.
But that was Edouard. There was
Edouard?
Yes, that was Edouard.
On the top of the hill is closed. 30,000 vines per hectare.
Yeah, at the very top it's 30,000 vines per hectare.
On the beginning of the hill is right, on the white marl.
Finally, we head into the cellar to taste some wines and discuss what we've just observed.
Saint Aubin, les Frayonnes. 1 year in a barrique, now it's in vat for this one. And stay in the 2nd year in vat. And we done the mineral salt given shocky test. It's salt, mineral. And you have good energy. It's a bit like zip. It's a bit like a pile 9 volt. Je sais pas comment on dit ça en anglais.
9-volt battery. But in the world of Lamy, that's a broad wine. C'est un vin large quand même dans ton monde.
You see vintage 20, it's more dry.
Very dry. So because of these conditions, you had to pick really ripe to get phenolic ripeness. So it's a broad vintage.
It's less classic than usual.
So you get classic Terroir Chardonnay and then high density Terroir Chardonnay to compare, both in 19.
We're about to taste Lamy's high-density plantings that we just drove past. In order to appreciate how fascinating these wines are, you need to understand the basics of vine planting density. Globally, Burgundy is already known for having high-density plantings, with a standard density of about 10,000 vines per hectare, or simply put, 1 vine per meter. This density is considered extreme in drier places like California with different farming philosophies. Olivier's standard vines are planted at about 14,000 vines per hectare. His middle density plantings are 20,000 vines per hectare. And his high density plantings are at an absolutely astounding 30,000 vines per hectare, meaning that there are 3 vines planted within every meter.
That's the classic cuvée des Chardonnay.
That's
Classic is 14 on 20. That's the vineyard we see,
Right,
the beginning of the middle of the hill. Début et milieu. And the high density in 19 is the very top of the hill. C'est le dessus très haut.
So he had an intern who focused on high density a few years ago, so he actually has numbers for you in what it does to the grapes.
On normal size in Burgundy, it's 150 grams. My estate in 17 vintage, it was 2 times less. On the high density, it was 30 grams.
Another thing to clarify here is that even though it might seem like planting more vines would give you more fruit, it actually increases the competition between the vines so much that it decreases your overall yield. So, more vines, more work, less wine. But Olivier believes it's more than worth it in terms of the quality of the wines and their increased expression of terroir and minerality.
But you see, there is not the same weight of grapes, but not the same water, not the same skin.
Olivier pours the high-density version of Derrière Chez Edouard.
It's like you took a wet towel and took all the humidity out of it. That's how the finish tastes to me. It's like wrung dry. It's so... C'est intense, no?
Et je pense que ça joue plus une pompe à terroir. It's like pump of terroir, high density, because more vine make more competition.
His father planted the first parcel by mistake. His father had 1,000 square meters to plant, ordered 1,000 vines, but he forgotten there was a little bit of a terrace, so there's only room for 700. What Olivier says himself was the concern of a peasant. I want my yield. He put all 1,000 vines in, thinking he would get the same yield. It's not what happened.
Less hills. More work, less hills. And maybe it's not very good for economic business, but different taste for me, different wine.
There's more labor.
Yes, it's 3 times more work for 3 times less hills.
Yeah.
We like this wine. For him, it's a good surprise. But after we don't invite anything for 10th century, it was this in Burgundy.
There were those densities.
It was a regular.
Phylloxera. It was 20 to 30,000, maybe more even. Champagne as well. I mean, when the densities went lower, it wasn't a qualitative decision. It was for the ease of work. First was for horses.
In France, it was Napoleon.
Olivier goes on to say that historically, the planting densities in Burgundy were always this high, and have only decreased since the 19th century. He explains that during this time, much of the water in France was unsafe to drink, and that Napoleon himself was urging wine growers to increase their yields as much as possible.
Sometimes there is some question about quantity. What do you like? Sometimes people need more volume, sometimes they need more quality. But if you want to make more quality, you need people to pay this quality. And sometimes it doesn't work.
So you have to be ready to spend more time and tend 3 more babies. It's like having triplets. En gros, no?
With the climate, the new climate, with more hot, more dry, I'm not sure if the wine is so dry. So for new vintage could be not sure the good way, Normie, Châtonnière.
You're not sure that high density is good for warm vintages?
C'est le problème des millésimes secs.
Dry vintage.
Le problème aussi, c'est peut-être qu'on tresse. Entre-sons, tu fais respirer ta vigne, transpirer ta vigne, et elle manque d'eau. Et il y a plein de paramètres qu'il faut qu'on règle.
There's things he needs to look at, including hedging, well, non-hedging, so he's not sure. Yeah.
For long term, it's good. But some vintage could be more difficult than some other one.
As we've learned, farming is key to the expression of a great terroir. But here, Paul points out that it's not as simple as just good versus bad farming. There's a lot of personality to each farmer's philosophy. One of the hot-button topics of today is concerning the use of tilling and cover crops.
So this is the Chassagne. It's one of the vines I farm. It's one of the vines that JJ farmed as well. Everything that I'm leasing at the moment comes from them, actually.
For our last stop of the day, we're visiting with Jonathan Purcell of the natural wine sensation Van Noy.
It's kind of special in the sense of you can't really farm it with a tractor. It doesn't pass at all, so it's all hand done. I try to keep it pretty wild with a good diversity of plants and kind of in the spirit that Jean-Jacques made his wines.
We're joined again by the photographer, restaurateur, and importer, Michael Sager, who brings John's wines into the UK.
And the other two vineyards I've taken over, I've changed a bit of the soil work. We do horse plowing now. But this one, I've just decided to keep it pretty simple, pretty limited plowing. We plowed 2 times in March, and then since then, it was all just either cutting the grass or hoeing by hand.
And in what state were they in when you...
This is quite a lot of grass and plants. It was much higher, yeah. All the vineyards were like no-till, organic, really beautiful though.
Yeah.
Totally different way of farming than you typically see in Burgundy. Everything here is plowed to the point where there's nothing growing. I think it gives something to this wine though. It always stands out for me.
For a long time, it seemed as though the natural wine scene was relatively absent from the Côte d'Or. But lately, the movement of natural wine and the farming practices that go along with it have made their presence known.
For me, it's simply a loose system of aesthetics with regards to wine that takes into account the farming, the vinification, how those things really end up yielding all of that we experience when we smell the wine, when we taste the wine, but also when we integrate the wine into our bodies, when we actually drink it.
This is Aaron Askoff, writer of Substack newsletter, Not Drinking Poison, and author of the just-released book, The World of Natural Wine. I asked him how he defines this sometimes controversial term.
To some extent, it's an acknowledgement that the palate is not just your nose and your tongue, that the palate is the whole organism, and how that relates to how something was farmed and how something was produced. It's an approach to wine that is sensitive to those things.
I'm a big fan of Aaron's fresh perspective and thoughtful outlook on what's happening in Burgundy today, so we'll talk with him much more in a future episode. But for now, I've asked him to help introduce John.
For me, John's story is like the greatest fairy tale happening to the person who deserves it most. I love John. He's really got a beautiful touch in winemaking. Very intuitive, not trying to imitate certain styles. He's unusual in just being, and how quietly radical he is as well. In that he sulfited, he says, one wine so far is 17 Julianas, the first vintage, because it just seemed like what you do. So he added 15 or 20 milligrams or something at bottling, and he didn't feel like it helped at all. So he stopped since then, which even within the context of all the wonderful, photogenic, cosmopolitan, young natural winemakers in Burgundy, many of them are not that radical. And then from what I understand, I think he met Jean-Jacques at a bar. It's such a beautiful story because for John to be able to take on vines that have a 20-year history in organic, low yield, basically unplowed, organic permaculture, it's just, there's no one else who's ever done that.
John is from California, but has been in Burgundy since 2012 and worked for the legendary Philippe Paquelet for many years. He started Van Noy as a small micro-negociant in 2017. The label was initially based out of Chris Santini's collective in Auxey de Retz and focused on wines from Beaujolais. Through a bit of luck, or perhaps fate, John met Jean-Jacques Morel, or JJ, a few years ago. As the two formed a quick friendship, John learned that JJ had also been doing something quietly radical for the past 20 years.
My theory is that he was extremely quiet about his viticultural methods while he was in activity, because even among his immediate peer group within organic winemakers, what he was doing was considered lazy or considered cruel to the vines or considered far too strange. I mean, like his closest peer throughout his career, Jean-Jacques, was Dominique Lafon in Saint Aubin, who's another hugely important figure in Burgundy natural winemaking. But Duran really is a little more, old school vineyard manager in terms of how he's, applying organics and biodynamics. Whereas to do the kind of yields that Jean-Jacques was doing year after year after year is really it's a major thought experiment.
JJ soon invited John to lease his wild and experimental vineyards, an incredible opportunity for a young, natural winemaking American in Burgundy.
They planted it by hand, no tractor, dug the holes and planted the vines. I think it was plowed maybe once or twice. The vines that are here are like really healthy and really strong. If you give them a little bit of love, they grow really, really well. Yields are very low, but that's fine. That's how it is. When you work with a bit of grass and you're not boosting everything all the time, you definitely lose yield, but you gain in other things, so yeah. It's one of the more storied vineyards in Saint Aubin, you could say. Châtaignier, like Lamy's vineyard is right there. Before that was put in, this was like the old National 6, before they had the A6. This was the road to Paris. So Paris to Marseille was this road. And they made that highway, and now they have the other road. So we're pretty much directly south-facing here, a little bit southwest. In a really hot year, it's complicated. The soil here is very, very thin. And we're kind of on a lip of limestone. This is probably the most unique place I've worked, just working since the past 10 years, just because you really use a machine. The plant life here is just nuts. This is a kind of sage, oregano. There's different types of mint, and there's fennel growing everywhere. It's a really Mediterranean site in a way. Mm-hmm. In the middle of winter, we have barbecues here. Huh. And we're warm, you know. Uh-huh. With the sun hitting the rock, if you sit there in the middle of January, you're fine. It feels like summertime. I mean, there's a sense of abundance and life. And I think it's also because of Jean-Jacques. I think he gives something to the vineyards that he planted that, I don't know, maybe it's a bit like spiritual or something, but consciously I know what he was doing, so I kind of have that grain in the back of my mind. It's always there. I try really to do as little as possible, to the extreme of sometimes having a lot of work to do. Because if you let things grow and it starts to get into the vines, it is a bit annoying. But otherwise, I really try to keep it pretty minimal. Even with spraying, plowing is the same, just kind of let it express itself.
So this parcel's been not tilled for 20 years, probably?
All three of them were not tilled for 20 years, yeah.
Okay.
He was doing no-till before it was popular. Really special. Totally not what you'd expect here, or really anywhere, especially with like really high-density plantations. And now that's kind of in fashion, but it definitely wasn't with his neighbors when he started. Yeah. He made a lot of enemies probably, but that's not his fault. So we tried to manage everything with a strong winter cover crop, which is not revolutionary or anything. It's still like pretty modern for here. But the thing is, in the summer, the soil is still pretty open. That's something to work on, because when you do start plowing, it's a huge intervention, right? You're turning over the soil, you're exposing all of those little bugs and worms to the sun, which is not especially good. But you're trying to like promote the growth of your vine. Like, you have to find that balance. So here it seems to work to plow very little, and so we're trying to do that with a horse as well. I think he only went through 4 times last year for the whole cycle, but we can improve.
But you gotta forgive me, I don't know the difference. So the
tilling is like ripping the soil, just like teeth. Your plow will have like 4 or 5 teeth on it, and you just put it on the ground and you rip it. And it makes clumps of dirt and it kind of goes everywhere.
So plowing is taking just a bit of soil and you turn once?
Yeah, exactly. More like you would do with a garden. Every season you like turn over your garden and then replant for that season. I think that's a better way to look at it for the vineyards too than ripping and like just kind of destroying your complexity.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm right. I'm not an agronomist, but when you do turn over the soil, like you have all the plants intact and you have that decomposition that's more interesting. Especially with a cover crop. And I think that's what you're looking for. It creates better soil structure and protects your soil from being burned up by the sun. The modern thing to do here is to till 6, 7, 8 times a year.
Just with the aim of destroying all competition.
Exactly,
so
yeah.
Cool.
That was my job for 6 years. After doing it for that long, you just never win. And not that you should win, but you're just battling something that doesn't even exist. I think people view it as like a fight against bad grass, you know. In French they always say mauvaise herbe. But there's not really a mauvaise herbe. Like there's
herbs that indicate certain things that are wrong with your parcel that you don't want to see. You know, everybody grows morning glory and chardonnay. That's all they grow here, because those are the only two plants that survive when you drive through your vineyard every week with a tractor. I mean, your soil is so compacted and so destroyed that you have to throw on 5 tons of compost per year and plow it 15 times. And so, yeah, that's one way to see it, and I think that's going to be outdated quite soon. I think a lot of people that do think about soil work and farming are changing, and I think the future is working with your site and the plants that grow there, or finding a balance between a cover crop that allows you to manage the soil in a way that you feel is appropriate for you to farm your land. You know, the other philosophical divide sometimes, especially in natural wine, is, well, at what point does the vineyard survive on its own, and at what point is it farmed entity? You know, is it natural? I think it's not entirely natural, in the sense that we planted these vines here, so you do have to take care of it, but there's different ways to take care of it in a smart way. And I'm not saying that I do it the best, but the idea is to always be improving. And with respect to like what you guys are interested in with the terroir, I think it's super important to talk about plants and your diversity based on the site, right? The soil and the mother rock and everything, probably. But that's also what gives you a good wine. It's a big adventure, yeah.
We continue walking through this surprising vineyard, snacking on fennel as we walk and feeling as though we're in a different world entirely. It's kind of like we're still in Burgundy, but a different Burgundy. Like a dream about Burgundy. Or maybe a parallel universe where this place never became the world-famous behemoth that it is today. A place where land is passed down not through family ties, but philosophical ties that feel just as strong, and where the vines grow wild in concert with the plants in between them. To end our day, we drive up the hill, right back to where we started.
This is where you guys were, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's Puligny down there. Yeah.
Do you see the shoot off from here?
The other slope.
Today you can't really see it, but normally you can. It's a bit cloudy over there.
Yeah.
But it's basically where the horizon is. So we're gonna slow down.
This one?
A little bit farther. Right here, where the branches are rolled.
And that's Blagny.
Exactly, yeah. That's Blagny. Everything up here in this bowl,
Yeah.
on more or less like this plateau behind this forest bit, is all Blagny. So my parcel is like in this triangular section that's like a village. Otherwise, it's all Premier Cru. It's all Garenne. This is all La Garenne. Folatière and all that stuff is just after the forest. So this goes down and then goes down pretty steep, mellows out again down to the town. And then this is probably like you saw in Benjamin's vineyard, it's those limestone shards. And then it goes up into that white marne. Do you call it marne in English? Marl? Yeah, marl.
Standing here, looking out over Blagny, Meursault, Puligny, and Chassagne allows us to contemplate everything we've just seen. Upon first glance, the producers we visited today seem very different from one another. But in the context of intention, and in the context of expressing yourself and your terroir through thoughtful farming, they're actually all right in the same lane. I hope you'll think about this the next time you reach for a bottle of white Burgundy, and that you reach for something with intention. Whether it be a charismatic Ludi in Meursault, a regal Montrachet, or something radical in Saint Aubin. Or better yet, maybe you'll go for them all. Because it's the endless diversity we find throughout all of this that keeps us coming back for more. Thank you to our guests Benjamin Leroux, Anne Morey, Dominique Lafon, Guillaume Lavollée, Françoise Vannier, Olivier Lamy, and Jonathan Purcell. Thank you to Paul Wasserman, Daniel Jonas, Jasper Morris, and Aaron Aizkoff for their commentary and guidance. This episode is made possible by our Season 2 partners, Becky Wasserman & Co., Lavollée, and Acker Wines. We want to extend a special thank you to our premier partner, Acker Wines, the oldest wine shop in America and the largest fine and rare wine auction house in the world. Remember, you can now get 15% off your first order of $350 or more by entering the code ROADSIDE at checkout. Check out their website, ackerwines.com, for details. and go snag some delicious white Burgundy while you can. Roadside Terroir is hosted and produced by me, Brenna Quigley, recording and sound engineering by Nick Canepa, and original music and sound design by Jeff Alvarez. If you like this episode, please share it and give us a review. It really does make a difference. This season wouldn't be possible without the support from all of you. Check out our website, roadsideterroir.com, to learn how you can stay in touch and how to help support this season by donating, sponsoring, or becoming a Roadside Insider. Thank you to Isa Islami, Jerusha Frost, Michael Sager, Summer Stabe, Ali Massey, and our amazing Grand Cru patron, Stephen Lippin, and everyone else who helped to make this episode a reality.
L'orange rose.
More rocks to take home. We'll come back and get you. Tu me diras, elle coûte pas bien cher à musée. Hein? I said she's not very expensive to entertain.
No.
Allez, bye bye.